So to start with, because history is important in understanding a community, I'm going to tell you a little bit about transgender history. It's important to know that there have been transgender people throughout history, across many cultures. There's evidence of this in different religions, that there are other gendered or third gendered people in different communities. I'm not going to go through all of that stuff. I could spend 3 hours talking about that. Just to know that they're there. A few key figures. People like Joan of Arc. People don't think about that, but she was actually somebody who dressed in men's clothing and fought as a man in many situations. So she would be considered a cross-dresser, and she felt like she was called by God to do that. So there's one example. There's many, many, many out there. So I'm going to start about 1923 with the German physician Markus Hirschfeld, who, when he coins the term transsexual, and he publishes it in an article called The Intersexual Constitution. He had an institute in Germany that was studying sexual orientation and gender identity, and it was a think tank and a clinic and a place where a lot of written materials came out. He also helped train many of the people who became professionals and leaders in the field of transgender health, medical health more than anything, but also psychological health. In 1926, Dr. Felix Abraham was the first documented transsexual surgeries. He did that at the clinic in Germany. I think he was, what did he do? He did some mastectomy. He did genital reconstruction on a female. A penectomy and a vaginoplasty. So he did those first 3 surgeries. Then we go on to Michael Dillon, and he was a physician in the UK. He actually was born Laura, and he was in the Navy, and he lived a very stealth life, which was, stealth means that he was secretive. Nobody knew that he had transitioned. And he was able to actually get hormones, and later was able to get a phalloplasty where he had a penis constructed. He lived in secrecy until 1958 when he was outed by the press, and then he went to India where he became a Buddhist monk and did a lot of writing. So in 1949, Harry Benjamin, you'll probably hear a lot about him if you know anything about the trans community. There used to be the Harry Benjamin Standards of Care. Now it's the World Professional Association for Transgendered Health. Harry Benjamin pioneered the use of hormone therapy in treatment of transsexual patients in 1949. At that point, he was in San Francisco. He was originally trained in Germany, moved to New York, came to San Francisco. In 1952, Christine Jorgensen, probably the most famous of the first people that anybody knew of who had sex reassignment surgery, she returns to the U.S. From Denmark after having the surgery. She was beautiful, blonde, a model, and so she was the pride of the trans community in that sense, of somebody who could actually do this and pass and be beautiful, and she became an advocate for the community. 1953, her doctor, Dr. Hamburger, publishes a paper about the desire to sex change, where he documents, I think, 450 different letters he got from people who were requesting sex change at that point, which suddenly changed people's ideas about this being just a random, every now and then occurrence to something that a lot of people were really interested in. Let's see. In 1959, Christine Jorgensen is denied marriage license in New York on the basis of her birth gender. Her fiancé, Howard Knox, is fired from a job when rumors of their attempted marriage become public. So part of what you're going to hear here is what the impact of laws have been on the transgender community, and they've been pretty horrible up until very recently, and still are in many communities. 1966, Harry Benjamin publishes the transsexual phenomenon, which really turns everything on its edge, and we start the actual treatment of transsexual patients. In 1966, the Compton riot in San Francisco is the first time transgender people fight back against the police, who have been raiding and abusing them and doing all kinds of terrible things, arresting them, putting their names in the papers. 1969, Stonewall riots, which was sparked the modern gay rights movement, is actually led by a group that includes trans woman Sylvia Rivera. Many people don't realize that the Stonewall riots, which were a part of the beginning of the gay and lesbian civil rights movement, really were started by a group of transgender folks. In 1976, Renee Richards, who was a male professional tennis player, transitions and sues the U.S. Sues the U.S. Open to play, and then she gets into it and wins. In 1976, there's a court case, MT versus JT, in New Jersey, that rules that transsexual persons can marry on the basis of their gender identity, regardless of what they were assigned at birth. 1980, Harry Benjamin establishes the International Gender Dysphoria Association to promote standards of care. It's still in existence. They just put out the 7th standards of care. It's free, so you can access that, so you know what they're expecting. In 1989, Ann Hopkins is denied a promotion on the basis that she is not sufficiently feminine. It brought a case against them on sex discrimination. And actually, it's important to know that a lot of people will lose their jobs based on what people think they are supposed to look like, and that if they're not dressing appropriately or doing things like that, many people in many states still in this country can be fired for that. 1993, Minnesota becomes the first state to ban employment discrimination on the basis of perceived gender identity with the Minnesota Human Rights Act. So they're the very first one to actually ban it. 1993, trans man Brandon Tina is raped and murdered. This is a big deal because it actually sets off, it's kind of like what happened in Stonewall with the gay and lesbian community, that this is the last straw of murders, that the transgender community gets really upset and starts an uprising of activism to change things as they are right now, and really pushing for hate crimes laws. In 1994, San Francisco passes an anti-discrimination law for gender identity expression. So however you express it or whatever your gender identity is, you can't be discriminated against in the city of San Francisco. In 1998, the Transgender Day of Remembrance is started by Gwendolyn Ann Smith. She started it to memorialize the murder of Rita Hester, who was killed in Allston, Massachusetts. Actually, the Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is on November 20th of every year, is seen now as a day of action, and it's a time when you'll see on the websites, they'll post all the people who have been murdered or killed as a result of being transgender. And it's actually a very sad thing, but it's empowering as well. In 1998, California amends hate crime legislation to include gender identity, so now they're included across the state of California. 1999, Texas decides they don't agree with New Jersey's law that marriage licenses to couples who are transsexual are valid, so they refuse to issue licenses to transsexual couples or somebody based on their gender identity. They see them still as the same sex. In 2000, there's a law to protect all students, including transgender, in public education from gender identity discrimination. That's in California. In 2001, the Kansas Supreme Court refuses to allow trans women to inherit her husband's property on the basis that her non-assigned gender identity and therefore her subsequent marriage to the man was invalid. That was based on a suit that his parents brought in trying to invalidate the marriage. So California becomes the 4th state to enact gender identity expression and anti-discrimination laws. In 2004, the International Olympic Committee agrees to allow post-op athletes to compete in the Athens Future Games. 2005, the United States House of Representatives passed an amendment to the Hate Crimes Prevention Act that explicitly include crimes based on actual or perceived gender, sexual orientation, or gender identity. It included gender identity and gender-related characteristics. So in 2007, gender identity protections are controversially stripped from the 2007 version of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. It actually becomes a big deal in the gay community because the gay rights organizations had some impetus in stripping it out of fear that it wasn't going to pass for gay and lesbian folks. In 2009, the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, signed by Barack Obama, allows for federal investigation of bias-motivated crimes based on gender identity cases where local law enforcement is unwilling to act. And in 2009, Obama issues an executive order banning the executive branch from discriminating on the basis of gender identity in employment decisions. So things are moving. They're moving forward.